Hi there, I'm Jen, this is Remembered Reads, and this is going to be a wrap-up of some of my recent reading of fiction. A couple of translated novels, a young adult novel, a play, and a comic book. I was trying to save this to record once I had a theme going on, but I think that's going to take me too long to actually read enough in a single theme, so might as well just do this in this kind of random way. I'm going to start maybe from the stuff that I was less impressed by and maybe work my way up to my favorite since I don't have any other way to order this. First up is the play. This is The Who and the What by Akhtar, whose novel, or maybe work of autofiction, depending on who you ask, Homeland, Elegies, has been, I think, kind of everywhere on the more literary side of BookTube lately, and his earlier play, Disgraced, won the Pulitzer. This is a play that is about a family in California, which is a father and his two daughters. The older daughter is not interested in relationships and is writing a book. The youngest daughter is maybe going to marry her boyfriend, and it sort of has leanings towards, like, what if you took elements of Taming of the Shrew and made it a Pakistani-American family? But it doesn't really feel that much like that, to be honest. The dad sets the older daughter up with a guy. They do get married, but drama still ensues. And there is some interesting commentary. What really brought this down for me is that the daughter is writing this book that is about gender and religion, but it feels like it was written by a man, because obviously it was. This author is a man. And I think most of the time, I think saying that something has a gendered tone is usually nonsense. Except this does feel like the book within the play is kind of mansplaining. And so I was left kind of meh on this one. It's an interesting idea, but I just don't care. But it just didn't work for me. I will say it is the very intentionally theatrical style of language in the writing, which I always think makes sense for musicals, but not for just regular plays. And so if you are someone who likes that kind of theatrical language, you will probably like that at a base level more than I do, regardless of all the other elements. So it left me kind of meh. I might still read his novel, though. Also leaving me kind of meh was Arvin Ahmadi's How It All Blew Up. This is the young adult novel that I mentioned. This is about an 18-year-old who is worried that he's going to be outed to his parents, so he runs away to Italy. The best part of this is that the framing device that's woven throughout the book is him and his family getting stopped by flight security coming back into the US from Italy because they were having a fight on the plane. And they're Persian, so there's a bit of racial profiling going on, but they had a fight on a plane. So, and that was fantastic. All the bits where the people are addressing, those are all in second person. They're addressing you like you're the person interrogating them or interviewing them. And that was really well done, but the whole stuff with this kid in Italy was ridiculous in pretty much exactly the same way that his earlier book, Down and Across, was ridiculous. And that one you have a 16-year-old who's running around DC on their own. And my reaction to that was similar to this, in that if that book had been about a 21-year-old instead of a 16-year-old, it would have been believable, because the kid is working in a bar, and they're mostly in Georgetown, and I used to live in DC, and you know, even if you're in your late 30s there, they card you everywhere, even if you're not drinking, just going into places. So I just didn't believe the 16-year-old having that experience. Similarly, the Italy stuff in here is based on the author's own experiences, but it's an experience he had when he was 25 or 26. So this kid having that experience at 18 just didn't work for me. Now, I think in both of these cases, an actual teenager reading that could read that as a kind of almost fantasy story, like a very wish fulfillment kind of escapist, that you could go and have this adventure and it would work out. But as a non-actual teenager, I just sat there going, these kids are too immature. No, they can't do this. You know, imagining my nieces and nephews trying to go on adventures like that and thinking, no, don't do it. So I think that is a book that will work if you are the correct age range for it. But otherwise, you'll just be frustrated. Because I think probably reading it realistically is the wrong way to go. Incidentally, I read reviews of this on Goodreads, and I saw a lot of people judging it on the basis of whether or not it was good religious representation, which I think is so culturally determined, and ignoring that kind of thing, which is a weird way to review a book. And that's all I'm going to say about that. Next up, I have a book that I enjoyed far more than I thought I was going to. This is Tom Taylor and Darick Robertson's run on Hellblazer, which is Hellblazer Rise and Fall, which is, of course, a story about this magician slash street detective. In this, he is in Liverpool. the possibly possessed body of a boy that he thought was dead as a child and his childhood friend, who's a cop, are investigating something. Now, I usually say that the best runs on Hellblazer are the ones in which people have a lot of social commentary and make you uncomfortable. However, this book goes for a lot more humor. There's still some commentary. There's still some scenes that are a little gross, but it is overwhelmingly more of a wink at the camera, and I really enjoyed it, which surprised me because usually the humorous takes, you know, they're just not what I want in a Hellblazer story, but I laughed repeatedly at this. Everything with the devils, I like Darick Robinson's art, you know, since Transmet, so that was great. All the stuff with the devil showing up was great. And maybe it's because I spent a long time hanging around with Liverpool supporters, but there's a bit, and I don't want to spoil it, but there's a bit in the end in which there's a big kind of football moment, and I just enjoyed this. I think if your only reason to read Hellblazer is to go for the uncomfortable and weird stuff, then, you know, this may not be satisfying because it definitely doesn't do that. But even though that's normally what I look for in this book, I laughed out loud at some of this, and I very rarely do that with any comic. So, yeah, I loved this, and I'm so glad I sprung for the hardcover. Yeah. So that's definitely going on up on the shelf here after I finish with this. Alright, next up I read a book that I knew I would like, because this is my kind of thing. And this is Ismail Kadare's The Traitor's Niche. This was translated from the Albanian by John Hodgson, and I've read some of his translations of Kadare before, so they're always great. This was longlisted for the Booker of the Year. It was translated in 2017, but it was actually written back in the 70s. This is set primarily in Ottoman-era Albania in the early 1820s, although we do get a few scenes that are in Istanbul. The characters that we get are Ali Pasha of Janina, who at the age of 80 staged a rebellion. He had been essentially a loyal Ottoman Pasha for Albania, which in those days included sections that are now Greece. And then he had, in very old age, had this rebellion. So he gets decapitated and his head is being taken to be put in the traitor's niche right in this square. And we hear from the man whose job it is to inspect the heads when they're on display so that other people can see the traitors to the state. We follow the man whose job it is to transport the heads from the death or decapitation site to the niche. We do see some things from the widow, and it's all simultaneously horrific and hilarious, which I think is what you expect when you're reading an Ottoman-era story by Ismail Kadare. Now, some people don't like that tone, and if you aren't a fan of the tone, you are not going to like this. I don't think this is going to turn you into a fan if you don't like that kind of thing. But I thought this was great fun and very darkly humorous. And also, and I mean, it's odd to say it's great fun when we're talking about people being decapitated and imperialism, but it is. Because a lot of it's horrific, and a lot of it really happened, but, you know, there is kind of humor in the horror, which, again, that's a very personal thing. If you don't like humor in the horror, maybe you want to avoid this, but I thought this was fantastic. And shame that it took so many years for that to be translated. Next up is a book that is not funny at all, and shouldn't be. This is Faruk Šehić's Quiet Flows the Una. This was translated from the Bosnian by Will Firth. This is a very poetic novel and with autobiographical leanings, and I've seen this described several times as a war novel, which it is on one level, but the actual war content is pretty minimal. A lot of this is actually about memory and the flow of memory and what memory is like when there is this really horrific war in the middle of that. As I'm trying to describe this book, I'm kind of being caught up in how you can actually talk about it, because it's not plot-driven even though things happen. We're following this main character, Mustafa, and he is working his way through his memories. He's been hypnotized at a circus, and he goes back in his memories to his childhood in the 80s, but then also to the war in the early 90s. And he's clearly has PTSD, and he's hidden away a lot of his memories, both the good and the bad. And so we go through his life. There are quite a few fishing scenes, and so a lot of the childhood things, you can see fishing on the cover even, are mostly about fishing, but then there'll be a side comment, like fishing in the river, remember the river was running red because there was so much blood. jumping the 10 years in the future, and then you go back to the childhood memory of, like, he's going through his cassette tapes in his childhood bedroom in his grandmother's house, and then we get that moment of after the war when he goes back to his town and the house has been destroyed. He talks about it being rendered in 2D and then realizes, where's the debris from the cassettes? Somebody must have stolen the cassettes before they blew up the house. And then we go back to the childhood, and he talks about he's going through, like, the square and look at the shadows playing together and how you can see the shadows because there's the Orthodox Church, the Catholic Church, and the mosque, and their shadows are coming together. And then we get the flash forward to when he goes back after the war, and only the Orthodox Church is there because the mosque and the Catholic Church were blown up. And so you go through it like that, which is really structurally interesting because you're getting bits and pieces of the past and the future and the present all woven together. And the style is very poetic. Describing it more than that, I think, would not be an accurate, it's hard to describe, and if you want something to be plot-driven, maybe that's not for you, but genuinely, I think this is the best book that I have read this year so far. I thought this was really brilliant, and I have Under Pressure, which is I think a set of short stories, but that are more narrative-driven than that, which is also by Faruk Šehić. And I will be looking forward to reading that soon, because that was really interesting. All right, I think that was all I was going to talk about. If you've read any of these, I'd love to hear what you think. That's it for now. Ciao.